Okay, so today I'm going to be doing a spoiler-free and spoiler review of this book, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This I am going to classify as an adult contemporary. While some people label this as an LGBTIQ plus book, and I could too, I do feel that LGBTIQ plus is a sub-genre of this particular book. It is a very hard-hitting contemporary. We're going to do spoiler-free and spoiler. I have a lot to say, so I'm going to get right into it. First of all, by telling you my star rating was 5 stars. So the premise of this book is that it is an omniscient narration, which means that Hanya Yanagihara can go into the perspective of any character at any given time, whether that is per chapter or in the midst of a chapter. So it's not a perspective book, whether it be singular, dual, or multi. It's omniscient narration. We, in the beginning, follow 4 best friends, and the book kind of chronicles them going through their lives. The main friend that we focus on is a guy whose name is Jude. Jude has had a very, I can't understate that enough, very tough upbringing. And I'll get into more as we go along in both spoiler-free and spoiler sections. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that, because if I say any more than that as a premise, it's going to give away too much. It's a very long book. It's 720 pages long, which makes it only 30 pages away from being a tome and a half, a tome being 500 pages. So know that it is a long book as well. Let's jump in with my spoiler-free section to 3 spoiler-free cons and 3 spoiler-free pros. My first spoiler-free con for this book is that it takes a while in any given chapter or in any given point in a chapter to determine which character Yanagihara has, through her omniscient narration, gone into the perspective of. The reason I'm saying this is because every time Hanya Yanagihara goes to a different perspective, that she starts off by saying he was walking down the street and he noticed this, no matter who it is. So you kind of have to just keep reading until you figure out with the surrounding clues who exactly we're following. Okay, for my second, I'm going to be looking down at a piece of paper. This book comes with a number of triggers, and I'm just going to tell you some of them. The triggers include, but are not limited to, self-harm, emotional abuse, pedophilia, and the R word that we can't use on booktube, so I'll say sexual assault. And again, that's just to name a few, so that gives you a bit of an idea of how tough this book is to read. I apologize about the lighting. My third spoiler-free con is a trigger warning. Some readers have either found it a depressing read or found themselves becoming rather depressed after reading the book. So do be mindful of that going in. I did not know this going in, and I think if I did, I may not have read it. That might have scared me too much to going into it. But yeah, just be mindful of that. I want to make that point because, you know, health is a very big priority, especially mental health. On to my 3 spoiler-free pros then, and my first spoiler-free pro was that this book was an emotional read for me. So while it was not a depressive read for me, it was an emotional one, and I do count that as being a pro, because if a book can trigger emotions from me, then for me, that is elevating my reading experience to a higher level. Not a lot of the time do books provoke such intense emotion from me. I experienced emotions ranging from happiness and joy to out and out raging anger to tears. We'll get into the teary part when it's the appropriate time. My second spoiler-free pro is again a subjective pro, and that is that Yanagihara absolutely goes there. She pulls no punches whatsoever. I spoke to you guys earlier with my cons about how there are trigger warnings for certain things. That in no way, shape or form does Yanagihara gloss over these trigger warning moments in the book. She absolutely goes there and keeps things extremely raw and extremely real. And my final spoiler-free pro for this book is that it has easily and quickly investable characters. So we're following 4 characters in this book, and the main perspective that we follow in omniscient narration, but perspective that we follow is that of Jude. I fell in love with Jude after reading 2 sentences from his perspective. I have never fallen in love with the character and become invested so quickly as I did with Jude in this book. But now I'm going to head over to the spoiler section. Sorry to you guys who could only remain for the spoiler-free stuff, but I have a lot to say in the spoiler section. So if you're not planning on reading this book, or if you have, or when you have, please come and join me over there, because I have so much to say, and that's why I have to limit the spoiler-free section. But if you are leaving me here, I completely understand. I do recommend this book. I think it's an incredibly important book to read. I just want you to be mindful of those potential trigger warnings. Spoiler time, spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. You have been warned, and yes, the birds are here to join us for this spoiler-free section as well. So don't mind them, but they'll probably join in every now and again with their thoughts as well. I'm putting the book up here to save holding it, because every time I hold it, I'm used to holding it on this side, the lighting goes darker, so I'm just putting it over there. But let's jump in, because as I said, I have a lot to say about this book, and if you've read it, I'm sure you understand that I have a lot to say. I'm going to try and keep this review as condensed as I possibly can. So just quickly looking down at my notes, the first thing that I want to discuss is Jude's past. The abuse that Jude went through was extremely tough to read about, and that's my first note for that. And yes, absolutely it was. It wasn't easy. As I said, you know, Hanya Yanagihara doesn't pull any punches. She keeps it extremely raw and extremely real. I did not cry reading about Jude's past. I did cry. We'll talk about that later. But I didn't cry reading about Jude's past, but that didn't make it any less tough for me to read emotionally. From his time at the home and dealing with his punishments there, oh my goodness. Can we talk about these people at this home and the way they punish their students? Are you kidding me? And this is only the beginning of what he went through. But seriously? I have issues with that. Issues, including the burning. The burning was really tough to read as well. To what Brother Luke put him through, oh my goodness. And here I thought that Brother Luke was a kind brother who was really looking out for Jude. Yeah, I was going to say a word there that I can't say on booktube, so I'll just say, yeah, heck no. I was apparently very wrong about that. And I am just so... shock horror doesn't begin to describe how I felt when I was reading what Brother Luke put Jude through. And the fact that he's saying that Jude needs to do this work in order for them to make money, I'm calling BS. I'm not going to say the word, but you know the word I'm saying. I'm calling BS on that one. Totally unnecessary, totally not needed, and just so wrong on so many levels. Then to what Dr. Trailer put him through. Guys, you know how Gumby goes into books? I haven't seen Gumby in a long time, but I watched Gumby a lot growing up. The amount of times I wanted to jump into this book. I am not a violent person at all by any means. If anything, I like to try and avoid confrontation, so I'm not violent at all. But the amount of times I want to jump into this book and cause some harm, let's just put it that way. And with Dr. Trailer, definitely. Not to mention Caleb. The way that Yanagihara was so explicitly graphic with what Caleb was doing, I was not happy. I fell in love with Jude from the first couple of sentences about him. I didn't even know he had a troubled past. I don't even know if I knew that he had a disability, to be honest. I just fell in love with his soft, kind-hearted nature. I was invested in him so quickly. And then the more I came to find out what everyone was doing to this character that, despite being fictional, that I love so much... issues. Of course, at the same time, it did explain why Jude was how he was in the present time, because for those of you who have read the book, you know we deal with past and present in this book. We dip back into Jude's past, and then we come back to his present and go back and forth and back and forth, and that's fine, and that does kind of take care of why the book is so very long. JB and Malcolm, to be honest, I was not invested in them. I didn't cry at this point, by the time we got through all the stuff he went through in his past, but it did have a very strong impact on me. Andy's quadrum. Oh, okay, yeah. Andy's conundrum is what I'm looking for. Andy's conundrum about whether or not to have Jude involuntarily committed. Yeah, this one really affected me in multiple ways. I was so happy that Jude at least had someone to go to who was able to help him with the physical side of his disability, and that he was also able to confide in him. But at the same time, I completely understood where Andy was coming from as far as whether to have him involuntarily committed or not. And the more the years went by, and the more Andy's thinking, I'm going to do this, you know, I really should, and I should have done it a long time ago. And the more angry that he gets at Jude, the more I absolutely understood. It's a tough one. Harold and Jude's relationship was just so beautiful. Clearly, Harold was not only what Jude needed at the time, and the adoption was so beautiful, but clearly Harold was what Jude needed all along, because obviously it wasn't until Jude finally, in a burst of anger, let everything out of his system. He did that with Harold. And so I really appreciated Harold being there, because Jude could finally release all of this stuff that he had repressed, and I just thought that was fantastic. But I have a lot of love for Harold, for his love for Jude and wanting to adopt Jude and take care of Jude. I really did appreciate that. So all round, I had a lot of love for Harold. Some triggering things, and let's talk about the cutting. The cutting really did affect me a lot. I have not cut myself before, but the way that it was written in this book was really tough for me to deal with. I have read books that have spoken of that have dealt with the topic of cutting and self-harm before, and I've also seen shows like 13 Reasons Why and other films and whatever that deal with this subject matter, but never before have I seen it be done in such a raw, real, graphic way many times. It was incredibly tough for me to read, and I honestly found the cutting scenes to be harder to read than what he went through in the past. I think part of that for me was a little bit of desensitization, not a lot, but I guess a little bit more compared to the cutting, being that it had already happened, there's nothing we can do to change it. But the cutting was happening at the present point in time. I wanted to do the Gumby thing, jump in the book and stop him. I wanted to take the razor out of his hands so many times. And I guess because, yeah, I don't like to get too personal on this channel, but I need to in order to explain where I'm coming from. As someone who has not cut himself, I don't understand what Jude is going through. So I'm very much like Willem in that way, in that I just want to jump in there and take the razor away from him and you know, try and work out what the heck is going on, because I don't get it. I don't get why he keeps going back and harming himself. And he's such a beautiful character with such a beautiful soul. It just doesn't make sense to me, someone who hasn't been there before. So please understand that that's where I'm coming from with that. But it was incredibly tough for me to read. Willem cutting himself in front of Jude. I knew this was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen moments before it did, because Willem was trying to get through to Jude in every single way that he could. And in the end, he had had enough of trying every passive way to get through to him, that the only way he could was to show Jude what he was doing to him by doing it himself, so Jude could see how it's affecting him. Do I condone what Willem did? No. Do I understand what Willem did? Absolutely, I do. And I also appreciate the way that Willem was reacting to the cuts, because it's obviously not something that he is used to. Jude is kind of numbed to it by now. But Willem's reaction was just like, I loved how we had that scene with Jude and Willem in the closet together, and they were just staying in that closet all night, and they only knew that a whole day had gone by because they saw the sunlight out of the crack of the bottom of the cupboard. I loved that. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 2 death scenes, because I'm trying to keep this concise and it's already gone on for too long, but I need to talk about both of them. First of all, Willem's death. This is what had me ragingly angry. What really let me down was after all of the really in-depth, real, raw, graphic as you can be scenes that we've had with Jude, when Willem died, it was over like that. It was so quick. He's in the car with the guys, and next thing he knows, the car has flipped, and he sees the kid that he tutored, and boom, he's dead, and we're moving on. And we're moving on to the funeral has already happened. Jude can't remember if he's gone or not. I found this so disrespectful. One, that he died, because finally Jude was having some great moments in his life. He was with a guy who loved him. And then to have Willem die, and then to have it disrespected in that we have a paragraph of it playing out, and then we completely move on, completely cut past the funeral, really annoyed me. We didn't even get to see Jude's reaction or feel Jude's reaction when he found out that Willem had died. We got none of that. So that really made me go into a blind rage. I finally got what that means, because I felt like I was going blind with the rage. I got to the final chapter of the book, and one thing that I found very interesting was that I hadn't cried yet. Has it been a tough book to read? Yes. Am I angry right now because of what happened to Willem? Yes. Was it really tough to read about Jude's past and Jude's cutting? 100%. But have I cried? No. So I went to the last chapter thinking, thinking it would end happily ever after, right? And 2 pages in to the final chapter, I sobbed the hardest, loudest tears I have cried in a very, very, very long time. Undoubtedly, the loudest, hardest sobbing I've done with any book, but the loudest, hardest sobbing I have done in general in a very, very, very long time. What Hanya Yanagihara did so well, as far as, I sometimes see tears as being a bit of a cleanser in a way. What Hanya Yanagihara does really well to provoke the tears is that Jude finally seems like he is getting somewhere by the time we get to the end of the second last chapter. He has yelled at Harold, he has started to open up, and things are getting better. And then he still kills himself. It ripped my heart out. And I was crying and sobbing so hard and so loudly that I had to go back and reread the last chapter again. And we'll go to my final thoughts now. This book, all in all, was such a fantastic book as far as looking at it objectively. Hanya Yanagihara did an amazing job, and I went through a wide range of emotions with this book, and I really, really appreciate what Hanya Yanagihara did from an objective perspective. From a subjective perspective, this was an incredibly tough book for me to read. Do I recommend this book? I do, but I recommend it with the trigger warnings in mind that I mentioned during the spoiler-free section. If you are someone that really struggles with those trigger warnings that I gave you when they come up in books, I need you to be mindful of that going in. I don't know of any one reader that has read this book that hasn't been, at the very least, fully affected by it, and at the most has gone into a dark depression over the book, which may sound dramatic, but I can understand why it might do that if you get lost in the book. So there is no way at all that I can recommend this book in all good consciousness for you guys without saying, please seriously consider if you are up for reading a book like this. This is the toughest book emotionally for me to read that I've ever read by far and away. So please keep that in mind. I'm not trying to scare you off, but I am trying to prepare you. Because, you know, mental health is a really, really big thing. And especially with what we've been going through the past couple of years, it's just something to keep in mind. I would love to hear what you have to say, and I'd love to talk about it further. But we have unfortunately run out of time. So that is where I am going to have to leave it. Letting you guys go. Peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I'll see you again soon. Mwah. Good night and happy reading.